And then today we talk about how we can do mission work in recreation. See, I told you, right? Recreation. We all do recreation, right? You guys do recreation? When you think about recreation, what do you think about? Things that you do in your downtime, when you're not working, when you don't have to punch in the times, right? Some of the things that I like to do, kick the ball, play soccer, or read poetry. Yeah, I am one of the strange people who enjoy poetry, right? What are some of the things that you guys like to do? Just quickly throw some things out. What are some recreation stuff you like to do?
I listen to classical music.
Classical music, okay. Anything more? Anything other recreation stuff? Huh? Golf? Okay, golf. Anyone else? Cook. Okay. Invite me, okay? All right. Anything else? Anything else?
Sports.
I'm sorry?
Sports.
Sports. Any sports. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Things that you don't do, right? You do at your downtime and you're out of your work time, right? So we're going to talk about that, right? But it's more than that. Like anything, right? Especially those most simplest things that we do every day, if you look into it more deeply, we see how profound it is. Like breathing. Right? To live, we have to breathe. But there's profundity in breath. That the Holy Spirit of God is called Ruach. It means breath. Wow. Right? So we're going to look at recreation today. Okay? This rhythm of rest and work. All right, so Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 through 11. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest and dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters. My kids love this sentence. It goes, see this, Daddy? Even your sons and daughters are not supposed to work. No homework today. Your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day, he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy, because the Lord rested. Okay. Recreation is fundamentally, it is about resting. But we're going to see how important resting is in relationship to work. And so it embraces the whole rhythm of rest and work. Indeed, rest is more important than work. Because it is rest that gives meaning to work, not work gives meaning to rest. Rest gives meaning to work. Because think about it. If you work without rest, what are you? Slave. And a slave's work is meaningless. He has no control over what he does, how he does it, and he has no claim to the fruit of his labor. A slave's work is meaningless. When we work without rest, we are living a life of slave. This is why Christ, God commands this Sabbath commandment. And this is an important commandment. It's a hinge commandment. It's right there between all the first 4 commandments about how to love God with all your heart and soul and strength. And then the next 5 commandments, which is all about how to love your neighbors, your parents, right? How to take care of your neighbors, all of that. In between it is this commandment to rest. Because rest is important. It gives meaning to every activity that we do. If you work without rest, you and I, we are slaves. When things are done in necessity, it is meaningless. When things are done with choice, then we could talk about, well, what is that meaning? Why did that person choose? Why did I choose this? And rest gives that space. You know, Dylan, he's now, actually, since 2, he's been always trying to claim his own will, right? Like, I don't want this oatmeal. He pushes away from the oatmeal. And I try to impose my will on him and says, you must eat the oatmeal because I'm your dad. I gave you life. And he will push himself further away from the oatmeal. So I tried another tactic. I said, okay, don't eat the oatmeal. You know what he does? He smiles. He goes back to the table and starts eating the oatmeal. It is not a way of disobedience. It's not an act of disobedience. Actually, for him, his activity becomes meaningful. It's his activity now. He chooses. And this Sabbath commandment allows the people of God to choose to rest. Because the whole royal battle between Pharaoh and Moses was about this exact thing, rest. Because this rest defined whether the Jews were slaves of Pharaoh or the free people of God. Because the argument actually came down to rest. So if you look at Exodus chapter 5, verse 4 through 9, Pharaoh replied, Moses and Aaron, why are you distracting the people from their tasks? Get back to work. Down on your computer, right? Fix the wires, right? On your knees. Look, there are many of your people in the land, and you are stopping them from their work. That same day, Pharaoh sent this order to the Egyptian slave drivers and the Israelite foremen, do not supply any more straw for making bricks. Make the people get it themselves. But still require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce their quota. They are lazy. Right? That's the attack, the gun, right? The bullets against rest. Anyone who rests too much is lazy. That's why they're crying out, let us go and offer sacrifice to our God. Load them down with more work. Make them sweat. And that will teach them to listen to lies. But who's lying? It's Pharaoh. And Christ, God, breaks that lie by saying, rest. Work doesn't give meaning to rest. Rest gives meaning to work. In fact, this weekly resting is actually just an anecdote, a parable for the bigger rest. It points to how our whole life itself needs a rest at the end. So the Hebrew writer, he talks about when finally Jesus Christ comes back, when the earth and the heaven finally meets and they get married, he refers to that as the true Sabbath. So if you look at Hebrews chapter 4, so we're going to look at several passages today. Chapter 4, verse 8 through 11. Now, if Joshua had succeeded in giving them this rest, and God would not have spoken about another day of rest still to come. So there is a special rest still waiting for the people of God. For all who have entered into God's rest have rested from their labors, just as God did after creating the world. So let us do our best to enter that rest. At the consummation, Christ coming back. But if we disobey God as the people of Israel, that we will fall. Rest. So God even talks about, the Hebrew writer, right, that eternal day when we finally reconnected with God and we have this intimate relationship as a day of rest. Because it's only that day of rest that will finally give meaning to all the labors of our whole life work. While we're in it, we do not know. And if we don't have that rest, then this life is meaningless. The popular aphorisms of the Epicureans is that eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow we die, because every work is meaningless if this is it. But the gospel says, no, there's rest every seventh day for us, the first day of the week, and then there's rest at the end of our life. And because of that, all our life labor will have meaning. And we have hints of it, and we can grasp at the hints of it when we practice rest, like we are doing today. Rest. Of course, I do not belong to this earth. Of course, I'm not a slave to my company, to my boss. Of course, I'm not a slave to continue my hot upper middle class or lower middle class or whatever life that we're living. Rest gives meaning to work. So it's basically just attention then, right? We practice rest, but I want you guys to know how important that rest is. Don't feel guilty about rest. This is the practicum part of this. Don't feel guilty about resting. If you don't rest, then your work will have no meaning. So rest, truly rest, and just embrace how powerful and how important it is to our lives, pointing to that great eternal rest that awaits us. So even now, I want you guys to close your eyes, take a deep breath, And breathe out and rest. Rest. One more breath. Breathe in. And then as you breathe out, thank the Lord for this rest. Open your eyes. Embrace the rest. Don't ever feel guilty about resting. If the words lazy, Pharaoh's voice, boss's voice, parents' voice, whatever that voice might be, that's a lie. Push it aside and hear God's voice. Rest. Rest. Okay, now there's two ways. So rest gives meaning to work, and there are two ways in which rest gives meaning, right? That I want to point out today. One is boundary, and one is identity. The first thing, boundary. So rest gives boundary to work. It tells work, this is where you end. And actually, all meaning is conditioned upon limitation. Right? We could talk about meaning only when there are boundaries. For example, stories. You read a story from page 1, and there's the end. And only if there's the end, only after we have read it, we could sit with our friends or spouses and say, so what is the meaning of the story? Why did the character do that? If the story goes on and on, then none of us will read it. Like a sermon too, a sermon. You guys all know the sermon will end, right? You guys haven't counted the minutes right now. If the sermon goes on and on, no one will sit. There's no meaning to talk about, but there's an end. There's an end. There's a boundary. Right? You could throw paint all on the wall or anywhere else, and that would be a mess a kid makes, right? Clean it up. But if it's on a canvas with some boundaries, and the name Jackson Pollock is in it, then that would cost you about $1 million. Because it's artwork. Boundary. Boundary gives meaning to what's within it. So boundaries is important. Rest defines that. And maybe this is the gospel for some of us today. That we cannot clearly define and say, what work is done. And this day, I'm not doing any emails. This day, I'm not calling anyone back. And this day, I'm not going to text. This day, I'm not going to do any Facebook. Facebook has become work, isn't it? Right? A lot of us, where Facebook is the work now. This day, I'm not going to do any Facebook comments or responses. Those places of work that you feel like you have to do to make you feel like this day is done, that you've accomplished something, that's the things that you have to say, I will not do it this hour. I will not do it past sunset. I will not do it this day. You must set boundaries. If you don't set boundaries, that will overtake you and will become meaningless task. And you would have made yourself a slave to it. So what are those things? And what are the boundaries you have to draw? A simple thing, again, practicum, right? A simple thing that me and my children do is at the end we pray. It's an evening prayer. I've shared with you, some of you guys. It's in our not a Facebook, in our webpage. And my kids love the prayer. And in fact, nowadays, when I get so tired, I'm like, good night, lights off, shut the door, I'm running out. He's like, wait, we forgot to pray. Oh my, okay. I go back, I sit down, and I pray, and it's good for me too. And it's a simple prayer. We say, Lord of the night, I give myself to your rest. Wash away my sins. Accept the works of my hands. Everything is good. Everything is renewed. Everything incomplete will be complete in you. A simple prayer. A simple prayer. And they love it. And it's good for me. There's a boundary. It's done. Even God does it, right? Even God does it. It's not like God, after 6 days of creation, was like, all right, give me some rest. He didn't need rest. But by creating those boundaries, he's able to give meaning. So at the end of each day of creation, he stops and then he says what? It is good. You can't say it is good while you're doing it. Once it's done, you can say it is good. Not that it's complete. At the first day, it wasn't complete. He still had more to do, but he still says it's done for the day. It's good. Boundary, meaning. And then after the 6 days, what does he say? It's really good. I'm a pretty good artist. But not that creation is all done. He's still continuing renewing it, but it was done. The task was done. Boundaries gives meaning. We must practice that boundary. All right, so again, rest gives meaning to work. Thank you very much, right? That way, try to get it inside our mind, right? And the flesh and blood. And what rest sets what? Boundary to work. And secondly, rest, okay, frees our identity from work. And this is also a great danger of our society, I think. All of us are at different places in this work and rhythm balance, so some of these things will hit you more directly, and hopefully I pray that that direct hit will free you. We're in a society, especially in the English language, right? Our work has become our being. What we do is our identity. So it's not English language, right? My name is Samuel, I am a pastor. We don't say I work as a pastor, I am a pastor. It's a being. And even though we constantly in our mind says, no, work is not who we are, yet in our language, that's what we're saying. This is who we are. And that is dangerous. To root our identity to work. Rio 2016 is done. Did you guys enjoy Rio? Okay. Atlantic had an article after it was done. It was entitled The Dark Side of the Olympics, which is that every athlete, after it's done, they pack their bag, they go back home, they face depression. Those people who worked so hard didn't get any medal, didn't even get any TV clips, what? They get depressed. But you know who gets more depressed? Those who stood up and their anthem was sung, they get even more depressed. Because all of their work was tied into that work. And whether you accomplished it or not, the thing is, it's done now. There's no camera, no interviews, no another activity or competition. Then who am I? They lose that. I think everybody knows the struggles that Michael Phelps faced. After the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, when he won 8 gold medals, he hit rock bottom. And he confessed this even actually right before all his competitions in Rio, in Bob Costas, that I took some wrong turns and I ended up in the darkest place of my life. And he confessed, you are the most famous person on earth. What are you depressed about? He will DUI, get drunk and drive, hoping that he will crash and die. Mike Spitzer, who was the Michael Phelps of the 70s in 72 Munich game, he won 7 gold medals. After 6th gold medal won, he was interviewing and he said, I don't want to race the 7th one. I know I always say I don't want to race and I still race it, but I really don't want to race it. Why? The interviewer says from ABC. Because you compete in 6, you win 6 gold, you are a hero. You go for the 7th and you don't get gold, you are a failure. It's no matter how much I go for, at the end I will end up as a failure. And then you continue to read the article, and it's a sports psychologist, Ms. Kluman. She says this, the way to be free from this is to actually, for the Olympians, to have, and these are her words, an identity outside of those activities. To have an identity outside of those activities. That's the only way you could go through the blues and not get depressed. And outside. But this is true not just for Olympians, but every one of us. And whatever task we're in right now, don't root your identity in that. And so, again, God, I keep saying God in the Old Testament, right? God frees us from that. He gives us commandment, be free, rest. And by it, he gives another identity to these former slaves. You are no longer slaves of Egypt, of Pharaoh. You rest. You are no longer tied by your work, by your labor, or who tells you what to do. You rest, and this is who you are. Sabbath becomes such a fundamental way to claim their identity that it is what sustained them, the Israelites, when they lost their land and lost their temple. Most people groups totally lose their identity if there's no nation, no land, no Jerusalem, no temple, no religious place to gather. But if you look at Ezekiel, Ezekiel was a post-exilic period prophet. He spoke to the people in the time of Babylon, and he kept saying to them, practice the Sabbath. Remember, you live in Babylon, you work in the Babylonian economy. Yes, you make like productive things. You can marry Babylonians, you have houses there. But remember, you are not Babylonians. How do we keep this? How do we practice this? By practicing the Sabbath. And Sabbath can be practiced in any place. On this day, I take a break. I rest. It becomes such an important way to protect their identity. By claiming who we are and resting in the relationship with God, we free ourselves from rooting our identities into works, or even the fruit or the result or the product of those works. We got to remember this, right? And God doesn't give us rest because you've worked hard and well. Where does God root our rest on? The reason for rest. Not because you worked 6 days really well, not because you had a good harvest, right? What is it rooted on? On God Himself. God Himself. And by that, He frees all connections from work and all ways in which a society judges us through our work. He says, your rest does not depend upon any aspects of work or any society's judgment of your work. It solely depends upon, I rested, so it's your right to rest. Rest becomes our human right because it's connected to what God did. That is profound. Every individual, you and I, no matter what our work is, and again, society judges our work in different ways. It does not depend upon that. You deserve rest, my brothers and sisters. Why? Because God gave it to you. It's a gift. So rest gives meaning to work. Rest sets boundary. Rest frees our identity from work. But there's the other extreme which we must be careful about, where we make rest into work. So, because rest becomes so important. I mean, if it gives meaning to work, if it's a way to root identity in the relationship with God and all that stuff, then rest becomes such an important thing that it's the idolatrous heart that we have in us. That whatever is important, whatever is good, whatever is a gift of God, we make it into God Himself and make it into an idolatry. And we see it in this story, Mark chapter 3, verse 1 through 6. Jesus went into the synagogue again and noticed a man with a deformed hand. Since it was a Sabbath, Jesus' enemies watched him closely. If he healed the man's hand, they planned to accuse him of working on the Sabbath. And Jesus said to the man with the deformed hand, "Come and stand in front of everyone." Then he turned to his critics and asked, "Does the law permit good deeds on the Sabbath, or is it a day for doing evil? Is this a day to save life or to destroy it?" But they wouldn't answer him. He looked around at them angrily and was deeply saddened by their hard hearts. Then he said to the man, "Hold out your hand." So the man held out his hand, and he was restored. At once, the Pharisees went away and met with the supporters of Herod to plot how to kill Jesus. Now, before just pouncing on these Pharisees like, "Oh, you dumb people," again, we got to have the historical background. Sabbath was so important. It kept their identity as people of God through their exile. It was so important. It was very important. But they got to a point where they thought it was Sabbath itself, not the God who gives the gift of rest. And then because now Sabbath is so important, the ultimate, the end, not the means, then what they do is they began to protect it. And the way they begin to protect it is they began to make lists. And once you make lists, it becomes work. Okay, lists are good, okay? Lists are good when we work, right? It allows us to see what we need to do, prioritize all that. But when list work comes into rest in this way, it leads to strange things. Even nowadays, there are people who think about, okay, what can we do and what can we not do on Sabbath, right? We can't switch on the light. So then what if we do a clap on light? Is a clap a work or not? Hospitals have lights on. Well, that's a different case. Can we ride elevators? As long as you don't press it. Now, there are really people who have this type of conversations. It leads to strange conversations. Like even this one. Here is a man, deformed. He can't do any work. He can't feed his kids. And Jesus thinks, well, this is obvious. And he heals him. But the Pharisees, they get so angry, they plot to kill Jesus for healing a man to feed his family. Just think about that logic. Right? If you just step back, you'll be like, what? And not only that, they work with Herod. They hate Herod. Right? For them, Herod is half Arab, half Jew. He's a mutt. And he's leading over them, and he killed Jews. And now there's a Herod, my friend. Because of why? Why is Jesus so dangerous? Did you hear? He healed a man on Sabbath. That is dangerous. When you make rest into another type of work. So rest becomes work when we make the boundary, which should be clear. As I said, boundary limits. It gives meaning to what's within that limit. But if that border or boundary becomes hard and impermeable, then it becomes dangerous. Like what the Pharisees were doing. I think about cells. Cells, it's distinct because it has border, but it's open and porous so it could interact with the environment, right? Things can come in, things can go out. Once it stops, it dies. But once it dies, and there's no interaction between the environment and the cell, then here's the irony of death. And the cell itself becomes part of the environment. Like the human body. We're breathing in, interacting, the oxygen, carbon dioxide out, we feel the sun, and it goes inside our body. We die, impermeable boundary. We don't feel the sun, we don't feel the heat, the air doesn't go in, the oxygen doesn't go in any of the body. It's impermeable boundary, absolute boundary. But then it begins to decay. And the body becomes dust and just becomes the environment. When we are so protective of rest, it becomes work. And now it's all work. It's nothing but work. We do this. I remember when Ian was first born, and I think it's like, I helped out a lot, I thought, right? I guess that's her husband's perspective, right? And then after a while, I realized, like, you know what? If I'm going to be a good husband and a good pastor, I really need my Sabbath, the Monday. So there was one Monday when my wife said, can you clean the room? And I said, honey, I must practice my Sabbath. I never said that again. There's an openness. You know, a way that we moderns do this, right? We make rest into work is by the holy word for us moderns is the efficiency. So work has to be efficient. And now we say even rest has to be efficient. Rest has to be efficient. How can I use this rest time well? How can I maximize it? All right, this is our Saturday schedule. Man, that's tighter than my work schedule. Right? You gotta make it efficient. Every minute, don't waste this rest. That's a lot of sweating. Right? Efficiency. We gotta be careful of it. especially apps. I mean, we use apps to make everything efficient. We make dating efficient with apps. Did you know that there's apps to help you sleep better? So we think like, oh, that makes sense. But actually it doesn't. Think about it, it's sleep. You need help to sleep? But I thought I did, actually. So I did buy an app. I bought an app, and what the app does is this. First, you're supposed to sleep with the app next to you on, and it measures the movement of the bed, so that it's supposed to predict your REM sleeps, the cycles. And then it will tell you about how many hours of sleep, and then at a certain time in that cycle, it's supposed to slowly wake you up. I'm like, wow, it's gonna make my sleep efficient. But the thing is, you have to make sure you turn it on in the morning, and then when alarm goes off and you wake up, you have to make sure you set, I'm awake, right? And then stay awake, or it's useless. Right? After doing it about a week, I realized this is kind of tiring, right? Before you go to sleep, make sure it's on, put it next to you, right? And then when you wake up, and you have to be awake, and then you look at a month cycle, oh, okay, so I need about average of. And then I read another book. Actually, it wasn't even a book. I think it was a blog post. He says here, the best way to sleep is this. When you're tired, go to sleep. When you wake up and your body can't go to sleep, wake up. During the day, when you're tired, close your eyes. If you have the time for nap, do it. If not, 30 seconds is fine. I was like, wow, that makes sense. Wait a minute. That's what I've been doing all my life. So that's what I do. That's it. After 9, I stay with not digital, but with paper. When I'm tired, I go to sleep. And when I wake up, there was a time when I was like, I need 8 hours sleep. Oh my goodness, it's 5 a.m. I've only had 6 hours. I gotta get 2 more hours. But it wouldn't come. But now, my body wakes up. My body just needs 6 hours right now. That's aging. Now wake up, and that's it. Don't make rest into work. Now, when this happens, right? So when there's clear, but not hard boundaries, and it goes in and out, what happens is this, right? Your rest becomes creative work. It's not like, I must not do this. You have this desire, you want this discipline, then you practice it. And yes, it is work, but it is your rest work, it's creative work. And then your work itself also becomes creative because your rest has seeped into it. So once you have rest as part of your rhythm, the work is no longer your necessity, your existential necessity. And once you're free from that, you are more free to do new things, innovative things, creative things within that work. And when you do that, again, the rhythm is not, again, hard work, rest, work, rest. It's work becomes like rest, and rest becomes this fun work. And all of it becomes recreation. Right? The recreation becomes recreation, a creative work. And it doesn't matter what work it is, any work. Again, back to that article, right? The Dark Side of Olympics. That's sports psychology. Ms. Kumin, he simply says to the Olympians, her advice is this, when you're in the event, enjoy it. The moment. Not rooting yourself into identity, but enjoy the moment. When you're free from it, if it's not all your life, you can actually enjoy it. Again, this is not true just for Olympic events, but any work. Remember the Iranian family that came and they needed help with the DMV, and so I went to help them. They said, can you come Monday? And I said, that's my Sabbath. No, I didn't say that. I said, sure. I went twice, and then both times, right, the receptionist, he is well-built, back straight, crisp blue uniform, his voice too, not loud, but filling the whole room. He would say the same thing over and over again. And in my mind, I'm thinking, why is he so excited about saying the same thing over and over again? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the MV. Okay, the next 5 here, please. If you are here at this moment, you can expect 2 to 4 hours of wait. Right, if you come on Tuesday to Thursday, you will have less time. If you come at 6:30, you'll be out in 30 minutes. But Mondays and Fridays are always the busiest days. Repeat, always 30 minutes, 30 minutes. In an hour, he'll always say this. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, if you're here, be ready to wait for a long time. For that's the name of the game in TMV, waiting. He said that. He said, but he said it with always like as if this was the first time he've ever said it. Like I said, I was there twice. Whole mornings, he says the same thing over and over again. But you know what I realized? He was saying those things as if they were the first time, the way actors do in musicals. The audience is always different. And this is his work. And even the repetition was a creative part of his labor. If we had no rest gives meaning to work, if rest sets boundaries, rest frees us from the identity rooting in work. If rest is not made into work, and if the border clear but permeable, and it goes back and forth, then recreation becomes recreation. When you think about it, I mean, the most amazing things comes out of this, right? In the interaction between rest and work, right? Wikipedia, it's about people in their recreation time doing work. And that's become one of the most authoritative actually body in Microsoft Word, right? When I want to reference things, there's a very specific button to reference Wikipedia. There's no button for Britannica Encyclopedia. It's dead. That was work. Wikipedia is recreation. Even the Gospels. C.S. Lewis, right, looked at the Gospel and said, you know, this Gospel, he's an author of Greek literature. He read Greek and Latin, like for breakfast, right? And he says, when you look at the Gospels, it is not like any other Greek literature before and after. It is a unique genre. It's a very different genre. And how was it birthed? It was the people of God, disciples simply saying, you know, the story of Jesus has to be told. No one paid them. They weren't going to get any rights. The publishers didn't come and say, write it. But this story had to be told. And as they were telling it, they had this creative freedom because they didn't have to meet any genre or any form. But they just had to be faithful to the life experience they had with Jesus. And then this gospel story about Jesus created its own genre called the Gospels. You see it everywhere. Even the church was birthed in recreation. Right? When it first birthed, it was all these people, right? Peter, James, John, but all this, not just the disciples, but everyone who came to be baptized in the 3,000, every one of them had work. And most of them were Jews, so they had Sabbath, so they had to keep the Sabbath. But they began to meet on the first day of the week, which was Sunday. Although Sunday was work day for them, they still created that little space in the morning and they came and they worshiped. Do you know that? The church is actually, even to now, is basically runs on the fuel of people who practice recreation. Like you guys. You don't have to be here. You don't have to pull down any of these things. You don't have to put the guitar up. You don't have to do anything of these, but you do it as your recreation. That is why the church is the most powerful organization. Because it's not tied to any money, any political, or any allegiance of this earth. We are free. This is one video I want to show you. It's a flash mob who plays in a public square, Ode to George. And I think this really expresses what comes out when we embrace recreation. This flow between rest and work. Can you make it a little bit louder? So, was it work? It was like work, rest. It wasn't rest, but it was rest work. It was creative, it was fun, it was Joyful. What really gets me about this video every time I see it is the people's faces, right? They're so happy. So it's joy that was right there, but now their eyes open to because of this people coming together. And I feel like this is a perfect illustration of what a church is supposed to do. That what a mission work looks like, actually. We with our own gifts, right? Coming and doing this creative type of work, making this music, whether it be through your work or through some writing or through some music or through some speaking, through some caring, whatever it is. And then just opening the world, the people, to joy of God. That's what it means to do mission work in recreation time, to recreate. Knowing that rest gives meaning to work, rest sets boundary to work, rest frees us from the identity of work, rest is not made into work, and there's this creative interplay between rest and work. Let's pray.